Haku Haku, Samtanet Masa Kasila, Matthew Vestuto, Noan Chumash, Kere Ines Shackman, Kokawash, Hardin Stanley. My name is Matthew Vestuto. I'm Chumash. My mother is Inez Shackman. My father is Harding Stanley. And I presently live in Ojai. I'll just give you a brief history of the Ventureño language. There are, the boundaries of Chumash territory are defined by our language boundaries, and within our language family there are 6 different languages, and the easternmost one is Ventureño Chumash, which is the language that I focus on. Within each of these languages were rich dialects. Every so far away there was a whole different way of, different words, same structure of the language. With missionization, when the Spanish came, people were centralized at the mission. So no matter where you went, usually those dialects died off, and the language that was spoken, the dialect that was spoken where the mission was, prevailed as the dominant language. So it all distilled into what you call a samala, which means a unified language of a mission. And so here we refer to our language as Mitskanakan because that's the village that was here. Yeah. I began questing after the John Harrington notes. I understood that our language was considered dead, but I talked to linguists and they said, no, there's plenty enough material to revitalize the language. And it was just a matter of getting a hold of these important documents. And so that's when my quest began to get those documents. And then, which are huge amounts. Like John Peabody Harrington recorded over 100,000 pages of notes on Chumash culture, with about 20,000 to 25,000 pages on Ventureño Chumash culture. Not just language, but stories, songs, recordings on wax cylinders. And so along the course of trying to acquire these notes, I became involved with an organization called ICLS, Advocates for Indigenous California Language Survival. We're a mid-sized nonprofit that advocates for all of the state's languages. And California is probably one of the most diverse places for language in the hemisphere, with about 90 languages within the confines of California. So it's a tall order, but we raise money and have events, and it's just a wonderful network of people that goes even beyond the borders of California. I got my degree at Evergreen State College in Washington, so I have friends working on revitalizing their languages from Washington and Oregon and California, and I learn a lot from them. Yeah. There's kind of a catch-22 with the notes in that some people don't know what's in them, and so they don't know what's available to them. And so if they don't indulge in those, then they don't know what, it's a catch-22. They won't go looking into them if they don't know what's there. And so part of my job is to disseminate the information from these notes to people. And while they were organized somewhat, there's still a lot of organization to do. So I suppose we could organize those into suitable packets for classrooms or for study. Our language contains our philosophical outlook from a long, long, long time ago. And you can't understand our culture really through the lens of English or Spanish. You need to know the language. All these studies, anthropology, religious studies, Native American studies, suffer from a lack of understanding of the language. Not to say I have the key to it all and I understand it, but I know that the importance of going for that you'll better understand the culture if you understand it through the filter of its own language. I've studied a book called On Language Death, and in it, the writer, who's from England and studied language death all around the world. I mean, languages can die from a myriad of causes, like tsunamis have wiped out whole languages recently. So it's not always colonization. Some people move and leave their language behind and join another group for economic reasons in Africa. So it's not cut and dried. But in this book on language death, the fella David Crystal used Ventureño Chumash as an example of how long a language can live after contact. And all along I was thinking, woe is us, we've lost our language, but here this guy is showing that we're an example of amazing longevity. So when the Spanish came in the 1760s, our language died in the 1960s, so it lived 200 years after contact. And I wondered why, and I think it's because the Spanish didn't have any overt policy of doing away with our language. As a matter of fact, here at San Buenaventura Mission, it's one of the few missions where they practiced recording women's native names. Elsewhere, they would just give women Spanish names and record the men's Indian names. Also, there was a priest here that insisted on giving Mass in our language, and he was rebuked for that, but he continued to do it anyway. So there was not always this disdain for our language. As a matter of fact, some of the best recorded information on our language was recorded here in 1810 by Father Senyan, Jose Senyan, and he wrote a confessionario, an instructional on how to give confession in our language. And so while you know, some of the things Catholicism introduced are not beloved, you know, or whatever, not appreciated, some things are wonderful, you know, like the recording of our language. God, I got off the res there. Well, one that came up earlier that I was listening to is there's a great quote by Fernando Liberato Quetzalcoatl, who supplies us with a lot of our information, and he's basically said, it's very interesting. He said, I've always believed what the old ones told me when I was a child, that the world is God. And elsewhere in that earlier confessionario and throughout the notes from other people, they when they translate it as Leos or God, in the Chumash they're saying Hey Shup, meaning this world. So our concept of God was a little larger, more grounded, you know. Spei Hey Shup lokakia thashash paket supnehet mupachunimash. Our language is a flower of this world. One thing you will do not deceive.